there were a couple of guys, Spanish-speaking gentlemen, by a piano in the street. And I went by and I said, "What's going on? What's this piano doing out here?" And they said, "Well, it's for pickup, for the Goodwill or Salvation Army or something." And I said, "Who here plays the piano?" And they said, "None of us." So I started playing the piano in the middle of the street. Well, they were smiling and hopping around. And I was like, I'm a lousy piano player, but this is one of those moments that just makes life worth living. This is all of a piece, Shep. Do we speak up or do we withdraw? Do we talk to the world or are we silent?
That was Chuck Tatham discussing the song Time, which I wrote after being inspired by Psalm 39. I'm Shep Rosenman. This is The Rest is Commentary, where we discuss what songs inspired by the Psalms inspire in my guests. Chuck is a multiple Emmy Award nominee and a WGA award-winning screenwriter, having worked on such shows as Arrested Development, How I Met Your Mother, and Modern Family. His humor essays have been published in the New York Times, NewYorker.com, Variety, The Globe and Mail, and he has worked on many high-profile feature films, for example, Wild Hogs, Shrek 3, Alvin and the Chipmunks, and more. Chuck was born in Canada and currently spends most of his time in New York. He has 2 adult kids, remains an avid hockey fan, and is a massive fan of EDM. For those who don't know, that's electronic dance music, which is why he chose this week's song. Chuck is a longtime friend and client and one of the funniest people I know. We discuss finding inspiration in the unexpected, what happens after our time on Earth, playing piano for strangers in Central Park on an abandoned piano, saying hello to random people, growing up in a noisy household, the clockwork theory of God, growing up lucky, and so much more. Let's start off by listening to the song, Time. I'm looking at Psalms as inspiration to write songs. Sometimes they're very deeply rooted in the text and sometimes they're not. But, that's the process of inspiration, something I'm sure that, you understand in spades, given that you're a writer. In the same way that I was inspired to write this song, I offered this song to you in hopes that it inspired something in you, whether love or loathing, hope or hatred.
No,
Questions or comments?
no loathing or hatred. Lots of thoughts and ideas. I mean, I spoke to a few people about the idea that you're doing electronic dance music and it's based on, the Psalms. And that right there it's very cool. You're bringing two seemingly disparate worlds together. And the song is extraordinary. It's right up my alley, electronic dance music. So
For what it's worth, this is the only thing that even comes close to EDM. Most of it's rock or folk. I have a little bit of jazz or jazzy stuff in there. You surprised me with the EDM piece. How long have you been listening to it?
remember, I'm Canadian. But here's the thing. Canadians have the American influence and the British influence. I like to tell people that I like my teeth. These are American and these are British. So that's Canada right there in my mouth. As a young man, I could embrace ZZ Top, Bruce Springsteen, Boston, Styx, etc. Or I could embrace the British stuff. I could embrace the Smiths, Depeche Mode, New Order. And I went that way. I like Canadian music. I mean, everybody here, Neil Young to Joni Mitchell to Loverboy, everybody here in Canada. I listen to so much electronic music. And a little before my time was that whole Detroit techno scene. Kraftwerk. That was the '70s. A little bit before my time. Then Detroit got into it, and then Manchester and New Order and Happy Mondays and you name it. And of course, I was in a house that had a lot of Bowie. Right over there is a little sun-activated toy. It's the Queen waving. She's in the window. It's a little toy we have. I'm surrounded by British monarchy and old texts and pictures of Henry VIII. So the British influence leads to the electronic dance music, which I enjoy to this day.
Though I did not grow up in Canada, I too hit a lot of those bands, Happy Mondays, New Order, but also others like Basement Jaxx. I'm a big fan of Basement Jaxx.
Yep, I got some on my phone.
And The Orb and Dead Can Dance and all that stuff.
Yeah, the Cocteau Twins and Cabaret Voltaire. There was a band called Blamage, and they weren't a big band. And as you know, a blamage in Britain is like a meringue. It's blanc, mage, white eat. And they had a couple of songs they played to death in Canada when I was a young man. I still listen to them, even though I'm, well into my 30s. I looked up a couple of things, and I'll read you Safaria, a nonprofit organization dedicated to using technology to build the future of Jewish learning in an open and participatory way. That's fantastic. I'm reading a book by Rainn Wilson called Soul Food. And he talks about the fact that regardless of your religion, and regardless if you're not religious, the idea that we're not here alone, there's a greater power, is something I believe and something he believes. But the idea that whatever your religious faith or pursuit may be, giving it in ways like your music, Shep, is very interesting and unique, and I salute you. Maybe I mentioned to you that both my grandfather and my uncle were ministers. I was raised in a fairly religious household where scripture was read, the New Testament was read, maybe probably more than the Old Testament, but interpreting text is part of the name of the game. And the idea that we're frustrated because we can't say something is very interesting. The idea that we're angry and confused and feeling a little helpless when we want to say something, but we don't or we can't, is very interesting, particularly in a culture where I think you might agree, people seem to have no difficulty saying whatever's on their mind. The anguish of saying, I'm feeling certain things, but I don't know if I have the right to put them out there, is almost a foreign idea in today's culture.
I grew up in a household where everyone around me had a lot of loud conversation. Nobody held back, like to the point of excess. Like no one was mean about it, but there was no sense of diplomacy. There was no sense of concern of possibly hurting people's feelings. So my whole personality is a response to that. I kept it in. My way of processing things emotionally was to write them down in a journal. And I didn't necessarily share what was on my mind because I didn't feel entitled to it because everyone around me was so vocal and vibrant in mostly beautiful ways. And I think that that ties into being a lawyer. Like, you are careful, you're diplomatic. I mean, not all lawyers. I mean, there are real putzes out there, but most of us kind of lead with diplomacy and neutral, factual approaches rather than taking very aggressive approaches once you get out of the phase of being an asshole lawyer.
I mean, it's funny. We were not a quiet household. We were WASP. We came over before Canada. We came over, I think Robert Tatham was 1830. I think I had a great grandmother who was Irish, but other than that, it's pretty much just England. We weren't the quiet wasps. You know, some wasps, the only time they talk, it's to say we're out of ice. But, but we weren't quiet. And I was the youngest. So my brother Jamie, who's a very funny, articulate guy, my sister Nancy is a very funny, articulate woman. I was the baby. I was the little guy. It was pretty boisterous here. It was pretty competitive, and everyone was pretty funny. My mom came from that very religious, very quiet household where you couldn't even play the piano. We were a very, very religious family in Eastern Ontario. Couldn't play the piano on Sunday unless it was a church hymn. Couldn't do homework on Sunday. Her brother, my Uncle Milton, became a minister. He's an interesting story. 1932, he was having breakfast as a 7-year-old, and my grandmother said, "Why are you using your left hand, Milton?" And he said, "My right hand doesn't work anymore." And it's because he'd contracted polio. And so my mother, who at the time was 5, no, in 1932, she was 2. Anyway, she did not contract polio, but she was a self-made person. If she were alive and she were here, she might say, as much as I love my mom and my dad, the minister, and my brother, the minister, I had to make my own life. So she got out of high school and into college at age 17, and she had her MD by age 24. For a woman in 1954, that was,
That's huge.
yeah.
Yeah. What's her name?
Ruth Tatham, Dr. Ruth Tatham. She died last August, aged 92. And she married my dad, which is convenient. I'm glad she married my dad. And dad came from a newspaper family, and he had 5 siblings, and that was a very noisy household. And I think my mom liked the idea of joining a noisy environment, like the one that my father could bring to the fore, and my brother and sister and I. And I believe it or not, I'm the quiet one. When I met my wife and I said, "We're going to go up to Canada," she said, "Oh my goodness, you're full of shit. There's no way that you're the quiet one." And the second day she looked at me and said, "You're actually the quiet one. You're the quiet one." But we were always, I think, diplomatic. I think I was 15 when I went to New York City. And the energy and the aggression and the in your face sort of everyone speaking their mind thing really was exhilarating for me. I remember thinking, I want to wind up in New York. And then you get into a writer's room where I've been for the last 3 decades. And boy, oh boy, you'd better be noisy. You better not hold your tongue. You will not pay the bills if you're contemplative or if you're ruminating. Having said that, we all know the story of like a Neil Simon who didn't speak up. You'd whisper to Larry Gelbart or whisper to Carl Reiner, and they would issue forth. But for the most part, I've had to be noisy to pay the bills. There's no Henny Youngman joke. Talk so much you get hoarse just listening. I am a firm subscriber to that.
I say this without exaggeration. I think the world is a better place for it because you are as funny as you are. When new lawyers or assistants start working at the firm and I ask them to work on your matters, I always introduce you with the following. I'm like, "This is Chuck Tatham. This is the funniest person you will ever meet." I've never been disappointed.
You're very kind.
And I think that humor is such a huge part. I mean, look, music is important too. It moves you, but humor really helps the medicine of life go down and helps people get through every day.
I agree completely. I'm mixed up in a nonprofit called Arctic Base Camp, trying to save the polar ice cap. I'm doing it with an old friend, Gail Whiteman, and a new friend, a guy named Rainn Wilson, who we know from The Office. And I'm there specifically because of my sense of humor. These are brilliant scientists with all of the materials they need to talk to power, to talk to culture about what needs to be done to slow climate change. And Gail called me and said, "We need humor. We need somebody to do sort of nutty, wacky things to get this information to people in a way that's palatable." I actually did a little movie with Rain. It was released yesterday. He's a narwhal and I'm a polar bear, and we're talking about the problems of not having Arctic sea ice. And go to arcticbasecamp.org. It's great.
I was just going to ask you to do a shameless self-promotion of the plug.
Hashtag Meltometer, MELTOMETER. The Meltometer tells you about where Arctic ice is melting and how it affects you no matter where you live in the world. Hashtag Meltometer, hashtag Arctic Matters. It's funny, Alan said, we're lucky to live in a time when having a sense of humor is valued because, 600 years ago, if you were a jester, you were like an outcast. Now humor is valued, and I'm glad it is because it's the only skill that I have. It is funny, though, when you're doing something like you read Psalm 39, you look at the lyrics to your song, there's nothing funny about it. And at the end of the day, Shep, I'm okay with that because when I come home at night, I don't generally engage in comedy. I don't watch funny movies or sitcoms or what else. I've had it all day. The guy at Burger King doesn't go home and eat Whoppers. Your perspective on should I speak and what do I have to say and is it worthy of saying and am I allowed to say it is very intriguing because at the end of the day, I come home from an environment where everyone has said every damn thing that's on their mind.
There's a tension in the Jewish texts about when you speak and when you don't speak. There are passages that tell you to speak your mind, specifically in the context of trying to fight injustice, right? But then there are contexts, specifically I'm thinking of the ethics of our ancestors. Those tell you the way to wisdom is silence. And what the rabbis are telling you there is spend more time listening than talking. In my life experience, I think they're both true. Like most things, it's a polarity, and you don't only behave one way or another. You find the right arrow in your quiver in the right moment.
It's funny when you think of the Sermon on the Mount.
Can you explain what that is?
Well, my pedestrian knowledge of this is Christ speaking to the masses and basically telling them what's what. One of the interesting things he does say in the Sermon on the Mount is, "Blessed be the peacemakers." And the thing about "Blessed be the peacemakers" is, do we make peace? And you would say you can do it both ways. But if you're in New York and you're on a subway and somebody's going nuts, you can make peace, quote unquote, by getting off the train. You can withdraw. You cannot engage. Or if you want to protect yourself or others, you can engage. Are you a peacemaker by engaging or you're a peacemaker by retiring? And I come from a Canadian culture where if someone steps on your foot, you say sorry. So, you know, my foot should have never been there. This is my bad. But here's $1. It's only worth 72 cents. But my whole career is verbal. I'm not a physical person. I'm not an architect. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a physician. I'm not an attorney. And all we do is articulate our thoughts. So to be silent for us is difficult, but to your point, imperative. If you're constantly making noise, you're not listening. And we live in a culture now which is a cacophony. The problem with a cacophony is there's so much noise that you have a tendency to withdraw. There's so much noise, you don't know who to trust or what to listen to, so you sort of bail out. Or you find your little narrow lane, whether it's Fox News or CNN or The Atlantic or the New York Times. You just find your little lane and hold on. That's getting harder and harder to do because everything is so polarized.
So how do you manage all the noise? And I also wanted to ask you, how does it work at home with your family? Like, is your family also noisy or is it more quiet or are there differences?
My wife she was born in New Jersey, and my mother, she's living in New York City. She's not a particularly noisy New Yorker. She comes from a pretty devout Catholic family. And she's a good listener. She's a very articulate, very verbal person, but she's a good listener. She's a singer. She's a jazz singer. So when it's time for her to manifest, it is also like you through music. My boys, Trevor is 26. He's extremely articulate, but a pretty good listener. He's a great debater, Shep. Very, 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 very bright guy. And Nick is a younger guy. He's in New York. He's 23. He's a little bit more like me. He's a little bit more easygoing, conciliatory, nice fellow. The irony here is he's in New York. Of the whole bunch of us, he's the most easygoing. He's in New York City. He just spent the past year as a production assistant on the last season of Succession, Nick learned a lot and worked a lot, but it wasn't particularly glamorous dragging, hefty bags across Canal Street at 2:30 in the morning. There's different political views and different religious views in our house, but we do get along. I think we listen to each other. I think we understand that different perspectives are allowed, and it's not a very dogmatic place. We're just live and let live. I think, and you might agree, Shep, for people of the younger generation, you and I were sent down sort of specific lanes. Jewish kid, Protestant kid. Now it's this mishigas, it's this whole combination of weirdness where if you ask a young person, do you believe in a higher power? They might say, yes, Justin Bieber, or Drake or The Weeknd. They're all Canadian. Can you believe the amount of talent that came out? And then also, people like me.
In other episodes of this podcast, we've talked about not only whether one believes in God, but what one believes about God. What does God do? How does God function? How does God act in the world, if at all? Would you be comfortable sharing any of that?
Sure. I would submit. It's interesting. John Milton, as we know, wrote Paradise Lost. And I don't know if it was Adam, Eve, or the snake who said to God, if you're the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the omnipotent who knows everything, you knew we would sin. You knew we would sin. Why did you put us here? If you knew we would sin, we had this nice holiday for a while before he ate of the apple and gained knowledge. But that makes me think Milton was obviously a genius and articulate and cynical. I would submit not so much that, quote unquote, he put us here and knew we would sin. He put us here and knew we would have bone cancer. He put us here, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's a greater power that came up with this beautiful thing called mankind and almost wound us up like Tinker Toys and said, go ahead, go ahead. What you do is what you do. I don't intervene. I think I've set up a beautiful species, but you're going to go and do what you're going to do. Do I not believe in a benevolent God? I think I believe that we're not arbitrary. Rainn Wilson does a good job talking about it in his book, Soul Food. Forgive me, Rainn, if I don't remember the name of the book. He doesn't think that we're here arbitrarily. We're not just some quirk or some mistake. We're not just some organism, which begs the other philosophical question. If we're just an organism, from whence did we come? And that gets back to, was there a creator? I think we're not arbitrary. And I'd have trouble getting through my day if I thought we were arbitrary, that we were here created for no good reason, we live for no good reason, and we die for no good reason. It is interesting if someone looks at a sunset or a rainbow or a puppy or a newborn baby and says, this is evidence of a benevolent God. They're allowed to look at a car wreck and say, this is evidence of an evil God. I look at puppies and dogs and sunsets as this is evidence of a wonderful world that was created by a greater being, but does not have ongoing input, which is tricky because it begs the question, is he playing cards? What is God doing? And I would submit that God is in us. God is in all of us. So it's not like he's out there watching or waiting or he's washed his hands of us. He's in all of us. I think if you are lucky enough to have a happy life, your instincts are probably, hopefully, ideally, to be a good person and do the right thing. I think that is God inside of me helping me be a better person. If someone wants to rob banks, I don't think that's God helping someone be evil. I think that's someone sort of almost who doesn't have access to that energy, access to that goodness. And if it's because of the great disadvantages they've had in their life, that's incredibly unfortunate. I'm keenly aware of how lucky I am. And if I'm this lucky and I'm not a good person, I should be flogged. That's why, and I don't want to get political, but if you see a person of great privilege, someone like a Donald Trump, someone of tremendous privilege, it's worrisome that he doesn't find the goodness in himself to say, I've had great advantage, let me extend this to the world. There's a lot of sociology and psychology and family dynamics that go into coming up with someone like Donald Trump. I can't imagine it was a breezy, easy, laugh-a-minute upbringing for that knucklehead. I won't make excuses for the guy because he's a putz of the first order, but I would like to think if you have had a few breaks, that the good energy that's in you will manifest.
There's so much to talk about there. First of all, in terms of Trump, right there with you, putts of the first order, I think is being kind. But I want to go back to like the beginning. I think what you described at the outset is what I think is known as the clockmaker theory. God built the clock, wound it up, and now it's just going, and it is what it is. Now, that sets aside the issue of free choice. And this is a problem in the clockmaker theory. If you buy the clockmaker theory literally, which, by the way, I relate to it a lot, I think it explains all the bad shit that happens in the world. But in theory, if we take it literally, then it means that God planned for the bad shit to happen.
I would submit that I don't take it literally. I would submit it was almost like release the hounds, like we were allowed to gallop off in various directions and do what we may.
You and I end up in a very similar, perhaps identical place, not necessarily about how Christ fits into the picture, but I think I ultimately reject the clockmaker theory because it doesn't account for free choice. And I believe that at the end of the day, whether you listen to that godly voice, the angel on your right shoulder or the devil on your left, that's up to you.
It's up to you. You would say, well, then wait a second. The clock doesn't have that free choice. The clock has been designated to do the same thing because it was wound up and aimed in a certain direction. I think you can have both. I think you can have a sentient being that was created to do what it may and have free will, but without ongoing intervention from the intervention is from one's soul. The intervention is from your heart. The intervention is from your mind. These things I think that the great being gave us, bestowed upon us, but we do have the free will to act like putzes or be nice people. It alarms me when someone of great advantage acts like a putz, and it delights me when people of tremendous disadvantage are the nicest people in the world. The older you get, the harder it is to write people off. I think you're supposed to get crankier and crankier as you get older. But the thing is, the more people I meet, the more I realize, judge not lest ye be judged. And so there's lots of interesting people. And New York City is my favorite place in the world because New York City is a place where you have these encounters with strangers with extraordinary stories for 97 seconds and then you go your separate ways. I love that about our species. I love that about that city. It's funny, I've never lived in New York. I spent a tremendous amount of time there once. And my wife, Joanne, lived there. And I said, I want to live in New York. New York's going to be the greatest. And she said, Chuck, just so you know, the typical New Yorker does not sleep till noon, have a 3-hour lunch, and go to a Mets game. I said, well, that sounds like a great way to go through life. That's not a typical New Yorker. So, but I do enjoy the typical New Yorker experience in that there's a bench, Shep, at 68 in Central Park West. It's a bench where I will go with a cigar, and forgive me for having such a smelly habit. I suppose there were smellier ones. But I sit there, and at the risk of looking like one of those crazy old guys, hey, what's going on? What's in the shopping bag? If somebody sits down beside me and they don't mind the billowing toxic smoke, I'll always engage in a conversation with these people and find out the most incredible things. If you're worried about the goodness of life, because you'll go to New York and you'll see people in the street, you'll see unfortunate people who have nothing. And it's very disturbing, but in the same breath, you'll sit down with someone from some weird place that you've never heard of, and you'll have the greatest conversation of your life, and it'll be incredibly uplifting. There were a couple of guys, Spanish-speaking gentlemen, by a piano in the street, and I went by, and I said, what's going on? What's this piano doing out here? And they said, well, it's for pickup, for the Goodwill or Salvation Army or something. And I said, who here plays the piano? And they said, none of us. So I started playing the piano in the middle of the street. Well, they were smiling and hopping around. And I was like, I'm a lousy piano player, but this is one of those moments that just makes life worth living. This is all of a piece, Shep. Do we speak up or do we withdraw? Do we talk to the world or are we silent? And this is a function of also being a large white male. I know that most people can't just march into situations and do whatever they want. And I'm aware of that. But I'm marching more and more the older I get into situations. And I don't know if I'm speaking my mind, but I'm making noise. I'm making noise. I try not to be a bother, but I spent 30 years in a writer's room making noise. I'm careening towards the next few years, the end of my career. I know that the noise will continue. Unfortunately, it'll be innocent civilians will be the victims.
But I want to kind of put some other language on that moment in Piano in the Street, or talking to the new person next to you on the park bench, or I'm assuming you're on a plane, you're going to talk to your neighbor, right? All of those to me are expressions of bringing the potential for joy to the world. And I think, why did God create us? And you say God's in us, and I'm fully with that. And I think what God wants of us is to bring that sense of connection, which often happens through expressions of joy. Playing piano in the street is the perfect manifestation of that.
You're right. I think step back and look at your behavior and say, is this a positive thing I'm doing, or is this a negative thing that I'm doing? If you yell at someone or cutting you off in traffic, it's a negative thing. It's not helping. It might be illuminating, the other person might drive better. If you have the advantages that I have, and you can go out into the world every day and try to be as pleasant as possible. And there are a lot of people will be lining up saying, he's not very pleasant. Chuck is really not, but that is a very selfish act, Shep, because if you do something that makes anybody, that brings even a little joy to somebody, it delights me. There's a sort of a unsavory egomaniacal aspect to this. Are you going to go and engage with those people? Maybe you'll bother them, maybe you'll annoy them, but ideally, you'll have a nice time with these new people. And you'll be giggling about it later thinking, I had a good time too. It's not altruism at all. I'm never saying, I'm going to make those people happy. I'll be the highlight of the day. I think I was walking into the mall the other day here in Canada, and a couple of two guys, probably 13, they're walking in ahead of me, and they didn't hold the first set of doors. So I opened it up, and they didn't hold the second set of doors. And I said, hold it. I turned around and said, you guys are supposed to be holding the door for old guys like me. And the one kid said, okay, let's do it again. So we all went outside. And these guys raced over and they both opened the doors. And I said, that's good so far. And they raced the next set of doors. And I said, that's what I'm talking about. And we got the line. I don't know if I brought any joy to the world. The guys were probably embarrassed and annoyed, but maybe they'll hold the door for somebody in the future. I don't know. I used to hold the door for people. These guys can hold the door for me,
I'm going to take the position that since this young man said, okay, let's do it again, which in and of itself is a playful response, they saw your challenge to them as equally admonishment and playful, and they responded in kind.
I'm not running around teaching lessons, but I think the point is well made. I didn't say, hey, assholes, what's the deal? And they could see that I'm perfectly able to open the door myself. I mean, every day of my life, I get into situations where I like to goof around. I've had tremendous advantage, Shep. I've had tremendous advantage. I came from some money. I came with an education, good health. The teeth aren't great,
but generally very good looks.
Generally speaking, for a man in his 80s, I look fantastic. Here's the thing. People didn't come to me and say, good going, when I was a kid. They didn't say, nice job winning that hockey trophy, or you're the valedictorian, Chuck, nicely done. My family, and I think in part because they are WASPs, expected it. They expected this sort of thing. And because it's expected of you, it's not celebrated or particularly special. What is expected of you is to take your advantage into the world. And I'm not here to proselytize about take goodness into the world, everybody. I remember saying to my mom once, when I'm jogging around town and I say hello to people, a lot of them sort of turn away or they scowl. What's the deal? She said, you don't know what they're going through. You don't know what they're going through. So you think you're spreading happiness and joy, but if someone's going through something horrible and terrible, and I'm like, hey, buddy, it's almost for them to go, well, look at this jackass. He's running around like some kind of a... So the older I get, the more I go into situations. If it's two 13-year-olds that won't hold the door for me at the mall, then I think it's time to maybe reorient those guys a little bit. Really? That's your job, Chuck? I said, well, I'm an old man. It's what I do. If I dog by somebody who's mowing their lawn and they say, hey, what's going on? And they just sneer at me, I'm like, maybe they're not having a great time. I won't bother them.
You mentioned your mom earlier, and just a moment ago, when you told me that you had EDM and I literally only had one choice, I was like, okay, well, you know what? There's an appropriateness given the fact that, one of the themes of the song is about, you only have one life and it's not very long. I thought for sure that was going to be something that you focused on. Did your mom come up for you in listening to this song?
Well, Mom comes up a lot. Mom was the last one. All the aunts and uncles are dead. My father is gone. She was the last one. And your point is well made. She absolutely maximized her journey.
Very impressive. I remember reading her obit, and you sent me some links about some of the things. It's very impressive woman.
She was impressive. She came from nothing, became an MD. She was one of 5, I think, female MDs that graduated in her class in 1954 and spent her life helping people. She was a devout Christian who I think would certainly say the end of her life here was the beginning of a more glorious life in the next place. But she was no layabout. I never saw my mother like lying on a sofa. Mom never said, I'm going to take a nap or stare into space. I'd go down to talk to her and she'd be ironing. And she worked in a psychiatric hospital here for 20 years, the largest private psych hospital in Canada. She would come home and make dinner and then go back to the hospital. She was incredibly industrious. And people say to me, she must have had a tremendous sense of humor. She couldn't tell a joke to save her life. She couldn't tell a funny story to save her life. She had a great sense of humor. She loved to laugh. And as a little munchkin, getting mom to laugh, getting dad to laugh, that's why I do what I do for a living. Not because she taught me how to tell a joke or be funny. But as far as our journey in life is concerned, I aspire to having her level of engagement and productivity because even as she got older, she was only 60 when she retired because my father was in bad health and she wanted to travel with him. So she had a good 15 years of traveling with my dad, even though she was still vital and had lots of patients at the. I hope they hired someone to replace her. What? Well, we have no doctor. Oh, she wanted to travel with her husband. Dad was very vital. Mom was very vital. They had a storybook romance. When we talk about going through life once, as they say, you only go around once. And what I'll tell people is, I said, they're going to put you in the ground. Put you in the ground. You might as well do it. I'm a firm believer, and with some exceptions, and I'd rather regret something I did than something I didn't do.
That ties directly into what we were talking about before. You're going to say hello to people in most instances. You're going to make the joke or play the piano. But you mentioned that your mom believed that the end of life on Earth is the beginning of a glorious life afterwards. Would you be comfortable sharing where you land on that issue?
Sure. I think we're here. I do not believe in reincarnation, but I think something happens. I don't think it's a void. I don't think it's a void. I don't think we came here for out of nothing for no good reason. And I don't think we leave to go to nothing for no good reason. I don't believe in reincarnation, but I do believe that also it's funny, there's lots of different philosophies. I'm going to go mow the lawn. Well, that grass must be an incredible pain when you cut it. There's no nerve endings in grass. There's no human nerve endings. There's no animal nerve endings, but there could be grass nerve endings. You could be really, that's a good point. I could be torturing a lot. I used to try and get out of doing yard work that way, Chef. That's the sort of the way I think. There's a chance that once we leave here, we'll wind up as something somewhere else in this grand universe. Oh, is that something you're clinging to just so you don't think you go into a void? No, if I go into a void, I think if you go into a void or a nothingness, the definition of it would be that you're not there going, oh shit, it's nothingness. Oh, you're gone. You're gone. It's not going to affect you at all. I'd like to think that there's almost like no beginning and no end. There's almost no beginning and no end. So whatever happens next may have happened before. Whatever happened before may have already happened and will happen again.
That's a very Eastern philosophy. It sounds a lot like certain Hindu and possibly Buddhist beliefs. And there's a connection to various Jewish beliefs. The Jewish belief is called Gilgul, which literally means a cycle or a circle. And, it's about negotiating upwards to have better experiences. If you fuck something up in this life, by killing a cockroach, you might come back as a cockroach.
You might come back as a cockroach. And I think about that. Oh, so you avoid bad behavior because of the next life? No, ideally I avoid bad behavior because I don't like bad behavior. But we talk about philosophies where you've heard people say there is no self. And the absence of self, if you have the intellectual, philosophical, and emotional makeup to say there is no self, I'm not going to do this about me. I'm not going to have this career in comedy about me. You have to sort of. You have to say, I'm going to be ambitious and move from small town Canada to California. So it's going to be about me. But at a certain point, you have to say, is it possible to take this self and put it on this sidelines and just say, this isn't about me. There's no me. Well, what about when bad things happen to you? There's something there that's confusing and bothering and alarming you. That haiku it was not a haiku, but it's an old saying, and forgive me the sources, barn burnt down, now I can see the moon. We all focus on the barn burning down. We really spend a lot of time on that. But if you can have some objectivity and some sense of perspective, say, well, you know what? There's a chance that when your barn burns down, you'll be able to see the moon. That makes me sleep. That is a philosophy that I can get into. People would say it's rationalizing, Chuck. It's rationalizing. It's actually kind of juvenile. I would say no, no. You can call it rationalizing. I can say that whatever bad things that may have happened in my life, I've tried to see there's something good out of it. Something good out of it. Because if push-ups are hard, but they make you stronger. There's things that we're compelled to do in life that we can focus on how unpleasant they are, or we can try to look past after some mourning a horrible tragic death of somebody, it's hard to find the silver lining. It's hard to say, "Oh, now I can see the moon." But I try the older that I get to have just a little bit less self. It's not about you, Chuck. It's not about you. You're here for a brief time. If those guys, I'll be in the ground and those guys at the mall, they might hold some doors for some people. And they might hold some doors for people literally and figuratively. I'm not suggesting anything I've ever done has been of any great benefit to anybody else. I think the more that you throw that stuff out there, some of it's got to stick.
For sure. This is also the other aphorism you didn't mention is making lemonade out of lemons, right? So I've never heard the barn burnt down, now I can see the moon phrase before. It's beautiful. It's been a year plus since your mom died. Have you made any lemonade? Have you seen any moon?
It's funny, Shep. She's with me every day. She's with me every day. And I've had to sort of put aside the last couple of years of dementia because I didn't know her and she didn't know me. But she and my father, who died in '09, they're always with me because I talk to people. I remember having a conversation in a comedy room once saying, do you ever go through life saying, what would my father do? Or what would my mother do? And they went, no. And some wise ass said, I think, what would my father do? And I do the opposite. I'm like, wow. When you live to 92, there was no great gnashing of teeth when she died. I miss her. But somebody wise once said they were dying and they said, well, I'm not particularly sad. Everyone around me is crying because they're going to miss me and I'll miss them. There's no more me. I'm going. I got my bags packed. And I think mom was a devout disciple of work as hard as you possibly can, be as nice as you can to whoever you meet, try to use good grammar. And when it's over, it's over. She saw probably hundreds of people die during her career. And she saw legions of grieving relatives. And I know for her, it wasn't just a fact of life. I know for her that to go to work, to do whatever she could to keep people alive and healthy was why she thought she was here. And it was just as important after the fact to help people. But I know, for instance, when my father died, at his funeral, she was very matter of fact. Everybody knew that she loved him. And she didn't have to go up there and say he was the greatest man in her life. We all knew that. She told fun stories and said he was a very productive, wonderful, sweet, funny man. And he's gone and we all miss him. Moving on. She could be a little clinical. I'll be honest. She could be a little bit clinical. But I was not arbitrarily and accidentally a happy kid. I have been a happy guy since the get-go. And I just thank the Lord and I thank the universe. I am so fortunate, Jeff, that people will say, and I'm very flattered when you say, he's the funniest man you'll ever meet. It would be a sin if I wasn't in a good mood. I really have been so fortunate. And it's just wired. It was just wired into me. You've heard of resting bitch face, I sort of have resting jackass behavior. So believe me, there's a line of people waiting to get in here and say, this man can be annoying. This man won't shut up. So
Well, but that's part of your charm. I don't know anyone who finds you annoying, just entertaining, but you're able to both be entertaining and engage seriously. And you do the serious piece in a way that is typically funny. And that I think is hard to do. You know, how do you talk about death and still add humor? A lot of people can't do that.
I think part of it is this somewhat clinical approach to death my mom and dad had. They were not great gnashers of teeth and shedders of tears. Dad was raised in Woodstock, Ontario, by a newspaperman. They had a farm. My father was, by 1945, was just turning 18. He tried to get into the war and he couldn't. He had boatloads of his buddies coming back in boxes. That was just the way it was. That was just the way it was. And, as far as polio, the war, the depression, my mom and dad, got through that stuff and didn't dwell on bad times. Woe is me was not allowed in this household. Now, a psychologist would say there's this sort of relativism where how can I complain about having toenail fungus? Fortunately, by the way, I don't have it. But how can I complain about toenail fungus when there's famine in the world? It's that whole relativism of anguish and torment. And a very good psychologist told me once, you're allowed to have your problems. You're allowed to have your issues. There is going to be famine. The Holocaust did happen. There will be terrible accidents. There will be terrible diseases. But your small problems, which seem relatively small and indeed are relatively small, are nevertheless issues that you should deal with. And if you don't deal with them, it's not good for your physical and mental health. So, but again, I don't have the toenail fungus.
You want to take off your shirt to prove it? I want to tell you the way my mother used to articulate that. She said, everybody has peklach and bundlach. So packages and bundles. Everyone has peklach and bundlach, but they're your peklach.
Yes, yes, yes. Well said. And that goes right back into a lot of these people, they didn't wave back. You don't know what bundles they have. You don't know what packages they have. And the funny thing is, it's all free, Shep. When I say what's going on, it doesn't even cost me a stamp. There's no downside to it. If I annoy the other person, I apologize to all the people that I may have annoyed. But generally speaking, it's a selfish act on my part because when I say what's going on, they say it's all good. What's happening, big guy? I'm instantaneously having a fine time. Now, you mentioned talking to people on airplanes. I used to always talk to people on airplanes, and then a couple things happened. One, I got the feeling that a lot of people don't want to talk. They just want to rest. And two, as I get older, I don't want to talk. I just want to rest. I was on a plane not long ago, and the woman beside me said, "What do you do?" And I told her, and she said, "Well, I have an idea for a script. Can I send it to you?" I said, "Sure." And I always give them my email address, and they'll send me stuff. And it was a story of a woman who had obviously schizophrenia and a lot of real psychotic issues with hallucinations and delusions. And she said, "Send me an email with your thoughts on the script." And I said, "You know what? I don't know what I'm talking about, but let's have a phone call." So we talked for about an hour on the phone. I said, "Is this about you?" And she said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Well, let's talk about that because this could make a nice movie. A movie might not be as important as getting to maybe talking to some mental health professionals about what's going on in your mind and in your life." And she said, "Well, I've talked to people and I feel a lot better." I said, "That's fantastic. And the fact that you're writing about it is fantastic." I gave her some pointers on character development and story and everything else. But it occurred to me, and she was very grateful and I was flattered, but it occurred to me that some force, Shep, had seated us together, and some force had her ask me what I did, and some force made me give her my email address, and some force compelled me to talk to her and hopefully maybe make things a little better. She was, I think, kind of anguished, writing this thing. And I'm no mental health professional, and I don't pretend to be. But if you reach out a little bit, you'll find these things. You'll find these things. And it was better for me. That's the thing. Oh, if I do this thing for this person, if I talk to this person, if I read this thing, it's time consuming. Hey, stop it. But when the dust clears, you go, well, that was good for me. That was actually good for me. I could have been watching Wheel of Fortune or making waffles, but I did this other thing that was good for me. Well, it was good for the other person. It might have been good for the other person, but it was gratifying for me. And it showed me, it continues to remind me that don't rest. The people beside you in an airplane, they have their packages and their bundle. I'm not Albert Schweitzer, but I think I'm sympathetic to people's plights. And I'm happy to give people my email address, even though it's led to some weird shit. So I won't go into that. Again, it's all free. I used to say, send your resume in, see what happens. It's a stamp. It's an envelope and a stamp. What's the worst that can happen? But yeah, just if I have any counsel for the good men and women out there, it's a stamp, it's a comment, it's a joke. It's very easy for a big old white guy a lot of people wouldn't say to a couple of teenagers, hey, hold that door for me. Don't do anything that's going to imperil you. But for the most part, going through life with just a happy comment and a little observation. And when I meet people for the first time, I often say, you've lost a lot of weight. You look fantastic. Yeah, and I've never met them before. So
That's awesome. Well, Chuck, you bring so much joy to me, to the world. This conversation was delightful. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Again, it's a selfish thing for me. I enjoyed it immensely. And Shep, you are a mensch of the first order. Best of luck and success with podcasts and music, being with your loving family, your career. Thank you for taking care of me and the legal front.
Always.
Have fun and have a great rest of this summer, my friend.
Be well. Thanks again. Thanks so much for listening. Special thanks to Chuck for joining me, to Dave Coyle for his help in producing this episode, to E. Rose for his help producing the song and this episode, to Jessica Hanna Swedler for her help on social media, and to Liat Silvera for helping me design the logo for this podcast. You can find Time and all of the other songs in this song cycle on most platforms that stream or download music, including Spotify and Apple. In the next episode of The Rest is Commentary, I will be talking with my song school friend and fellow singer-songwriter, Terry Sunflower. We discuss the song Two is Better Than One, which I co-wrote with Liz Hanlon and was inspired by Psalm 139. We discuss songwriting challenges, journeys of self-discovery, gender identity and sexuality, relationships with our parents, the role of music in recovery and self-expression, coming out to your family, songwriting as a therapeutic outlet, the importance of community, and so much more. Please join us.